you are being recorded, so also feel free to turn it off and turn it on and off as much as you want. Does that sound good? Yeah, sounds good. And so I just want to briefly introduce Nazshonnii and kind of so this talk is really about activism and academia, and one of the key things that I wanted to bring to this series is this kind of question of this that we're on occupied lands or all around America in our various research activities and around the world as well. And so I think these are serious questions for geographers to consider, and especially at Penn State, where I'm currently on Lenape land in Philadelphia, but Penn State also sits on Lenape land, Haudenosaunee, Shawnee, and Susquehanna people's land. So this is a serious question. So through my Jewish activism, I know that there are a lot of Jewish people in the San Francisco Bay Area who have formed relationships with the Sogorea Te Land Trust. So I reached out to Sogorea Te Land Trust, and we got a gift. We got Nazshonnii Brown. So we should be so happy to have Nazshonnii come and speak to us and offer her wisdom. And just a brief background on Nazshonnii Brown. Almaweri, am I pronouncing it right? Almaweri is Nazshonnii is a STEM educator and a mechanical design engineer working on both land and office projects at the Land Trust. She is passionate about STEM education and advocates for exposure and opportunities for underrepresented groups, especially Black and Native women. And with that, I will hand it off to Nazshonnii. And are you're sharing slides, right? So I hope you have sharing capacity. We're good. Okay, great.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate the awesome. Okay, I appreciate the intro. I was thinking about also having some breakout rooms today. So at one point it says share in the chat, but maybe I'll just pop up a breakout room. But I wanted to know if there's anyone that is in need of an interpreter. That way we can put the interpreter in the breakout room with that person. Or does anyone else know who needs interpretation? Okay, well, I guess we'll just have our breakout rooms. Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen. And as I go along, people are welcome to share in the chat. Also, if there's like a pause and you're just like, hey, can you explain this really quickly? If there's something that that was not understood, we'll also have some time at the end just to have a discussion and to answer questions. So no worries if your question's not answered, we'll get back to it and to make sure that we're having a conversation. I don't really like talking at people, but I also want to have these slides. That way you can think of questions or think of how you want to engage with this information. So I have a check-in question for you all just to see what's important to you all. And the question is, what plant is sacred to you? What plants are sacred to you if there are multiple ones? And sacred could mean many different things for different people. It could be a place, it could be a feeling, it could be having dinners every week with your family. It could be going to a sacred site and honoring that sacred site. So just think about what's sacred to you in your own definition of that word, and tell us what are some of those plants that are also sacred. And then if this takes you a minute, no worries. Feel free to share it in the chat throughout the talk, and just you can also share why. In previous sessions, another person shared that an oak tree outside of their house was sacred to them, not just because of the fact that it was such an old plant relative, but the fact that it was a part of their family in some ways. It was incorporated into their household because it was associated with home. I also have another story very similar to that where we had a magnolia tree outside our childhood home. So there are tons of pictures of my siblings climbing the tree, hanging upside down, and like playing around in there, racing around the tree. So that tree comes up in a lot of memories because of sensory details, seeing the flowers, smelling the flowers, but also having pictures of my loved ones having fun outside and playing in nature. Garlic, nice. So yeah, again, no pressure, but definitely share the chat if you want to. Yerba mate, nice. Consumed throughout Latin America. Monarda, native bee balm, sage for culinary reasons, St. John wort, nice. Golden seal, elderweiss. Is your mother's from Switzerland? Awesome. So we're seeing like some of our lineages are being called in right now, as well as acknowledging that there are medicinal properties, as well as culinary reasons that we could use these plants and not just use, but develop a relationship with these plants. So really grateful to hear those things, and we'll continue to see other people's answers. So again, I work for the Land Trust, Urban Indigenous Woman Led. And one of the things about the Land Trust is that we focus on women in specifically um, because we come from matrilineal societies. So a lot of indigenous people in the US specifically, they have a system that looks to the women for guidance and look to the elders of their group for guidance. So it's important that we honor that legacy, but also maybe you just have a matriarch in your family and just the one that always holds it down. So it's important that we honor those women, but we also see that with the personification of the earth is our mother as well. It provides so much for us. So again, honoring women and honoring motherhood and those that provide for us. So when Karina and Janella decided to create a land trust, they realized that when they went out to go look for the information about the organization, the room was filled with men, and they were like, "Okay, this is not representative of us. What we want to do is make sure that people have space to pray together, to gather, to share food with each other." So there was a need for a land base because the Lishana in this area do not have a land base at the moment. They're not federally recognized. And federal recognition is a whole other conversation where some people are at a disadvantage if they have it, some people are at an advantage if they have it. So really, each and every tribe has their own history, culture that is very different, as well as struggles that are very different related to colonization or caused by colonization. One way that a coworker has put it is that not everyone's experiences of colonization are the same. So we should definitely sit and listen and hear these stories from each other to understand. In short, our purpose is to return Indigenous land to Indigenous hands. And I'm sure you all have heard the term rematriate the land, return land, and you're probably like, what is rematriation? That's a great question. And this is what Karina sums it up to. If we are able to return land to the original stewards, we're then able to create abundance for our communities. So I will talk a little bit more about what those practices of rematriation look like too. Janella, who is our other co-founder and director, has a really well, this isn't a direct quote, but it was a kind of like a paraphrase from an article that she was in, and they had asked her to talk a little bit more about sacredness, and she just said that if there's something that you value in your life and it's sacred to you, I'm going to do everything in my power to respect and protect it, just as you're doing, because I don't need to have the same relationship to understand that that's sacred. So for Janella to be someone who's not a Shan to recognize the need for Karina and her family and other Ohlone people to have ceremonial spaces and to have access to their ceremonial plants, I think is very beautiful because it's something that we can all model in the world where we are being good friends and being good guests and accomplices in making sure that our relatives have the things they need in order to thrive in this world. So one of those things was the arbor space. An arbor is a ceremonial space. We see it a lot throughout California, and it has been more than 200 years since California natives, specifically Nazshonnii people, have been able to be in an arbor space. So unfortunately, through the the violence that was committed by not only missionaries, but as well as the Spanish government, but just waves of colonization hitting this part of the states, um, taking away culture, taking away the ability to practice their religions or their faith systems, taking away their food sources, and really just committing genocide on all fronts. So now this arbor space is in East Oakland. It is used for celebrations, marriage, mourning as well. If someone has passed on, we light a fire for them. Um, Gathering together, it's really great for social distancing because it's so huge. We're able to sit with each other at least 6 feet away. So that's really great for our staff members to be able to gather there with each other. So I'll mention the programs that we have. We have a language program that's being facilitated by Karina's daughter, Deja, which is super important because as we walk through this world, we have to recognize that wherever we are, that's someone's ancestral land. So we should do our best to be good guests. We should also acknowledge the fact that these plants had names before English came along or before other colonizing forces came along. So we should recognize them by those traditional names. Just as we're all named a certain way, our parents gave us names and they hold a lot of power. It's important that we are, called those names or the way that we want to be called. Very similar to pronouns, respecting how people want to be introduced and respecting how people want to be interacted with is super important. So language, very vital to culture, and keeping that alive is super important. Ceremony, just gathering together, sharing food together again, being in right relationship with each other. There's a picture of Karina Janela and the maestra of a Kalpuli dance group sitting together at one of the sacred sites in Emeryville, California. Right now, there is a shopping center that was on top of one of the largest shell mounds in this area. And they did find ancestral remains. And to this day, there have been a lot of demonstrations to educate people about the fact that when you go into this Apple store or I don't know what else is there, Old Navy or anything like that, Uniqlo, you're walking on someone's relatives, you're walking on someone's ancestors in village sites. So it's very creepy and eerie, but also just tells you how you can interrupt that violence even though the harm is already done. How you can not participate in that now that you have that knowledge. Sacred plants on the left hand side. So not only calling the plants by their names, but also interacting with them and learning from them, observing, seeing what the plant needs, learning how to do tule mat weaving, as well as creating salves and tinctures from things like mugwort, tobacco, sage, elderberry syrup, what other ones? Soap brew, a lot of things that we see in California that Native people here were using for to sustain themselves. And then on the right, we have land care. So we have a number of different things that we're constructing outside of the arbor, just so we can, do our work. We have a water catchment system. One of our partner organizations have helped us with the knowledge to set that up. And the land care really is for our community. So with the resources that we are creating, we're able to make sure that if there's ever a disaster, the people in that area have a water source or a food source. We have a food source as well if we ever need to go there in case of an earthquake in California. So super important things that are going on in the community, as well as our food distribution, which was started up just last year in response to the pandemic, and several other programs. We were making sure our elders, especially, are getting the things that they need. So instead of or actually, yes, breakout rooms. Um, so I don't think anyone needs an interpreter. I'm also realizing that I don't have the option for breakout rooms, but that's okay. Um, oh, it says join breakout room, but I'm not sure if that someone set it up for sharing in your rooms. If you didn't share, no worries. You can still communicate that in the chat. I also want to acknowledge another thing shared in the chat. Let's see. It was Chris. You shared about desert sage in the evening, reminds you of the person that you want to be. So thank you again, everyone, for sharing those responses. And in our group, people shared about things going on in their homelands, as well as things tied to their lineage and those feelings that it brings up. So I know sometimes talking about these things can be a little hard. So no worries if you haven't shared. Let me just pull up my screen again. And then I know our group needed some more guidance on that. So I can definitely go more into examples of rematriation, how I view it, how others in our community see it. Um, and well, let me just finish these two sides and then we can jump into questions and getting you all to talk about land acknowledgements as well. In order to do our work, we that is funded all by Shumi, and Shumi is the Chochenyo word for gift. So if you are in San Francisco Bay Area or even in other places, some tribal groups or just groups of Native people may have set up a land back fund or indigenous land fund. It'd be great to support that. In the Bay Area, we have this for our organization, and it's voluntary. It's based off of how much you make, and also if you rent or own your house. So it's considering what you're able to give. If the expected contribution is too low or too high, you're also free to adjust that, which is great because everyone, we may have other commitments and we don't know. So you can give what you can, and we appreciate it. So yeah, this funds our tools. It funds the dirt that we use to plant our food, the compost, all of that, everything, the gas in order to put in our vehicles so we can go to all the elders' houses and deliver them food. So we have our food distribution where we actually say hi to our relatives, and it could be someone else's relative or just somebody's grandma that's on our list, and they're like, hey, I don't like this, or hey, I'm allergic to this, and we listen to that and we make sure that they're getting a balance of foods in their food bags. Outside of Shumi and also just being in conversations about this, here are some of my suggestions on how to engage in this work. This is specifically for a lot of youth. I often work with middle school and high school youth, so they're very simple, but each one of them can expand into a much larger thing. So today we've seen it connecting with your own lineage and looking at where harm has been done to you or your family or your ancestors, as well as any harm that your ancestors have committed, and thinking about how you can make that right. Educating yourself. I tell my students, just you being here and being a student is important, and you're continuously learning. That's super important. But part of the education for us adults is wherever we live, wherever we work, and wherever we're going to school, we should be acknowledging the people that are there. So I heard people talking about, or not people, sorry, Zach was talking about the Lenape people. So that acknowledgement is super important. Even if they're not here today, we still need to acknowledge whose land they're on. And if they're here today, we need to make sure that we're elevating their voices. So that's something that you want to ask yourself: are they here today? Is their culture being protected? Are there things that they are trying to protect that I should also consider sacred and protect? What resources can I offer them, or how can I be a better guest on their land? So land acknowledgements, we'll come back to that. Sharing the knowledge with other people, interrupting violence in every form, in any way you can, whether that's someone says something that's blatantly racist or just it's just discrimination. You're like, yep, nope, don't do that, or hey, let's talk about this. Oops, ouch. However, people do it in their places, or maybe it's a microaggression and it's things that go under the radar, or things that people feel like they don't have the energy to really talk about, and they're just like, you know what, I'm just gonna let it slide. if you're witnessing that and it's something that's not affecting you, like you can very well step in and help that person and also educate someone else on why that's not appropriate. So I think that there's so many things that reinforce colonization, even though we think of colonization as something that's been done, it's like it's still happening through the way that we speak, the way that we interact in the world, the way that we treat others. So it's very important that we interrupt all these forms of violence that have been caused by colonization, including misinformation. So if someone says something that's incorrect, it's like, I would encourage you to go research that. I would encourage you to go talk to someone who's actually from that culture or faith background or that part of the world. Be a better guest. We talked about being a guest on Indigenous land and what that looks like. Karina describes it as if you go to someone's house, you're not going to open their fridge and just rummage around and be like, "Oh, can I have this?" And like you're not going to prop your feet up on the couch. And also, first off, it's you should take your shoes off at the door. Where you asked to take your shoes off at the door. We don't touch things without asking. So super important. And I think a lot of people's families as well as cultural backgrounds is just being a better guest and asking permission. If you're not sure about something, just ask a question. But also recognize that some people aren't always willing to do that labor. So if someone doesn't want to talk about it, then we have the internet, we have other people that we can go to. So I have two examples of land acknowledgements here up on the screen. And I wanted to spend the rest of the time just hearing from you all, answering any questions, as well as getting you all to think about how to interact with land acknowledgements. And I'll tell you how I view land acknowledgements. Basically, as I said, living, working, going to school on a land, you have to acknowledge who is there, even if they're the descendants of the people that were there before are no longer there. You have to acknowledge them and how you've benefited from the colonization of that land. You have to acknowledge the fact that some people are continuing to like continuing the harm by being there, by developing it, by privatizing the land or doing other things with it that are probably terrible. So on the left, we have an example that was put out by a private university. On the right, we have an example that a community member put together. So we can just take a minute to read this and also just talk about, I could just read it. So on example one, we start with a recognition that we sit on the ancestral land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land is of great importance to the Ohlone people and has been since time immemorial. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. Then they go on to add a little bit of history. So really, their land acknowledgement is that first paragraph. And then they have a page on their website where they explain who are the Ohlone, what happened, the colonization that happened. On the right, the community member says, take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we gather. For thousands of years, this land has been Huichin and the surrounding area, including ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone and Bay Miwok. They have committed to the stewardship of this land, even as they suffered from ongoing colonization and displacement. We are honored to be here on their land, and we strive to live in recognition of the ways that we ourselves have benefited from that colonization and displacement. So I want to hear in the chat, you can unmute. What do you like about these? What do you not like about these? Do you have any suggestions? Is there anything here that you're like, I wonder why they said that? Or what is Muwekma? Or what is Chochenyo? What are they talking about displacement?
Well, I really like in number 2 that they are continuing to talk about the displacement and that who is on the land has benefited from the land. So there's a bit of accountability there that I don't see in the first example.
Compare and contrast, I like it. or if anyone has an idea of what they would add to this as well. Maybe you have your own land acknowledgement and you want to share it right now, feel free to.
So I like the second land acknowledgement. It seems more in the present rather than in the past. But one thing that I found with land acknowledgements is that they're often just a sort of like statement at the front of a talk or at the front of something rather than like supporting actual actions. And so I'm wondering if this is something that you've also encountered, or in what ways can these land acknowledgements really go beyond just being a statement?
That was a question right at the end. If that's something that I've also encountered, right?
I'm sorry if my microphone isn't very loud. And in what ways can these land acknowledgements go beyond being just a statement?
Thank you. I can hear you. It's just like there's a little background noise, but we can hear you. Yes. People should definitely do more than the land acknowledgement. It makes me smile because seeing so many statements come out around police brutality, around the hate crimes committed to our Asian relatives is so frustrating because people put a statement out and then they go about their lives. They pretend like, oh, okay, we did what we needed to do. I'm a good Samaritan. And it's kind of like a little checkbox. And we don't just check off this and then, go about it. Just like if you have kids, you're not just like, okay, I fed them, I clothed them, good. What about how are they doing? Is there anything else that they need? How can I leverage my power and resources in order to make sure that people's lives are not in danger? So for me, it's really frustrating because I see so many businesses, universities, nonprofits, influential people do a statement and then not have any actions match those words. So yeah, definitely. If you're gonna say this, I need you to mean it. And then it's okay. Like if there's something you can't do, then don't say that you can do that. But yes, when we say these land acknowledgements, we need to actually believe that, and we actually need to follow through. Because if I'm gonna say this as a guest on Ohlone land, it's like I'm here doing what I can. I look to the guidance of the Sean Ohlone here, but I'm not gonna say something I'm not gonna do. Like I'm actively working with the organization, and I think that's part of how I can support them. But I'm not gonna be like, yeah, and I think this should happen, and not have that be in other parts of my life. Sorry. So interrupting violence, that's why I brought that up. Something that we can do every day, something we can do in classrooms, on the street, at the dinner table. If we really love our relatives, we'll help them learn, we'll help to, educate them about where they're being unkind or they're just being bad people. What kind of actions should universities take beyond typical land acknowledgements at conference? Thank you, Rams. Correct me if I'm wrong. Shomi is great. If your university can support the local community, in the local indigenous community, I think that that's something that they'd have to have a conversation with the people in that area about. I think when Zach and I actually talked on the first time on the phone, I don't know if I suggested like reaching out to a local center, tribal council, if they're there. So that's something that can help to get individuals, but also like big institutions started, is just by developing that relationship, checking in and seeing what they need, how they're doing, how you can raise awareness as well. And there are universities out here in California that are taking initiative with Shu'umi. So they're starting to set up their institutional Shu'umi, which is an option, and just say that we commit to giving this amount of money every month or every year. In addition to that, universities have so much power here in California. They have a lot of private land, and they've been in conversation with the local tribes as well as representatives of cities and counties. That way we can shift having like more signage out there in the world, as well as more exposure to land acknowledgements and like work that can help you get engaged in this at public events. Mhm. So I'd love to hear any questions if people have that at the moment. Um, I could also just go into breaking down what my thoughts on some of these acknowledgements, but I also I want to hear what you all think. You've heard from some people, but I also love when it's interactive and you're probably like, I wonder about this. Go ahead and ask it. Don't worry about it.
I just wanted to say this is so timely because the university is working on a statement right now, and so is the department, and so as you go through this, anything you really want to say, don't do, please let us know, because because it's happening now here, and there's been a lot of really good discussion to try to get it right, but it's just so amazing to have you here right now during this time to have your guidance on this.
Awesome. Yeah, get on them about that. Be like, make sure you do it right. Yeah, maybe if I go through a little bit. So acknowledging the name of the land, its indigenous name, acknowledging the tribal group or the people, and if they're not there, the reasons why. One thing that I'm really big on is just calling it what it is. So we use words like, what's the word? This is probably a little too drastic, but if someone is underage and they've been harmed and it's a sexual assault, sometimes we'll see it in the media as an adult has intercourse with a child, and it's like, no, that was rape. Just say.
Right.
So that was like a very clear example of like where media and also just government doesn't call things for what they are, and then that also continues harm, because there's some people that are reading that and they don't understand why it's wrong, even if it's like a 1-year age difference or 2-year age difference. It's very important that we say what actually happened. So we talk about genocide and colonization, but what did that actually look like? Is this making sure people understand what happened and why it was so inhumane and terrible? The fact that we had crops like amaranth that people were killed for having those seeds. And it was a staple for so many people in, I believe, like Central, but also South America. And the fact that missionaries in Spain saw that as a reason, like again, genocide on like all fronts, kind of. So it's like they were like, if we take this away, they won't have their life source. Just with the buffalo, if we take this away, they won't have their life source throughout the world. If we take away their language, they can't organize a rebellion. So the fact that everything was done so strategically, and then we look at slavery in the U.S., breaking up the Black family, everything was done on purpose. And we see like the ripple effects with children being taken away from their families at the border, families being separated in inner city communities, and like, why is that happening? So for me, it's just like, I need you to say it, what happened here, who did it, how they're gonna make it right if they're still here, or how you, as someone that's benefiting from everything that came from that, how are you gonna make it right?
Thank you.
Mhm. And I mentioned I'm also a guest on Ohlone land, so something that I have to think about every day, something that has made me a better person and a better guest in other spaces as well. From other friends of mine, oops, sorry, alerts going off. From other friends of mine, they've shared like if they want to go on a vacation, they're not going to go unless they were invited there. And I really love that because it's like, yeah, like what gives us the right to just be tourists and ask like terrible questions when we get there? So I love the fact that you're invited there or like you go there for a reason to other than just like, oh, it's pretty. And I've done it too, but just things to think about in our daily lives. Touching people's hair, touching people's kids. I brought that example up recently. Like people will come up to my nephews and they'll be like, oh, you're so pretty. They think the little one's a girl, and he's like, no, I'm a boy. And they'll try to touch his hair and they'll try to touch his face or touching pregnant women's bodies as well. No, don't do that. An idea that like before we even do anything, we just ask permission. When we go out into the world and we harvest things from a plant, in some way acknowledging that it's giving us its life, as well as food, like animals and stuff like that. You have to acknowledge all of that. Oh, sorry, the chat is going off. The second one makes you a little uncomfortable, which is good. Yes, Zach. Yes, talking about real things here. What does invited or guest mean in the language of a land acknowledgement versus an occupier? Yeah. True. So we talked about displaced, like not really, but we mentioned displacement. There's so many people that are displaced, whether they were brought here violently against their will, they were promised a job opportunity and it wasn't the case. They were promised the American dream, it didn't happen. Or the straight up the government they did it to a lot of natives. They were just straight up like, okay, we're gonna move you over here. You're gonna live here now. And this was like after colonization, like that was also colonization where we just relocated a bunch of people. The Great Migration as well. And when I said like a job opportunity, that goes for other immigrants too, where whether it was a railroad or are working on farms, people were brought over here and they were treated terribly. And we still see some of those effects today. So obviously, those people are not occupiers. They may be occupying this land, but they are not occupiers when we say that they're not settlers. I think of it more as people that can just go and come as they please. And that's what happened when a lot of colonizing forces, as well as like the settlers coming from the east in the form of Manifest Destiny to take over this land. That's what I think of as settlers. Just like the amount of privilege they had to just say, yep, this is mine, I'm going to kick you off. And also the fact that we have a lot of people here in the Bay Area that are just, yeah, I moved, you know what, quit my job and I moved and I'm going to go back home. And after you've taken so many resources from this area and you've only lived here for like 2 years, but that's another story. Sorry. And then there's being a guest. And I think in order to be a guest, you have to be engaged with that community. So in a way, like we all are occupying the space, but until we start a conversation, until we engage and start to do things that are good for our community and the local indigenous community, then we're not a guest. It's not that you're unwelcome, it's just that you need to be a good guest. And to do that, you have to participate. I hope that made sense. I talked about like other things too at the same time, but I feel like I'm a guest because it's like my people weren't brought here. We didn't come here out of like, oh yeah, let's just move. It was for very specific reasons. Yeah. How dare you leave early, Beth? No, just kidding. They probably already left. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes. If there's something you want me to explain or you have another question, let me know.
I guess if anyone else has a question, feel free to jump in. But since we have like one question, I maybe leave us with like some advice on how to be in the process of becoming a guest if we're clearly not guests on this land. But yeah, what advice would you have to start that process?
Yeah, so there's a resource online called the Native Land Map. I'm gonna pull it up right now, and it's native-land.ca. Oh, is this it? 1 second. Yes, okay, that was it. It was just a different page. So this was put together. I'm sure people can come in and edit things as well. And you see that it's only for specific areas, but oh wait, they actually do have some in Africa, which we didn't see last time, and in Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, Northern Asia. So if you go into this map, you can type in your address, you can type in your county or your city, and you can figure out today whose land it is. Some of them you may, and the borders that we see. Oh, am I frozen? Can anyone hear me? I can't see the screen right now.
We can hear you, but not see you.
Okay, it's like it's loading. Can y'all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'll do a little wheel thingy. So you'll notice that some of these borders are overlapping, and that's because I mean they all have a different story, but oftentimes it's because a tribal group was given a reservation or a reserve, or they said, okay, you can have this back, and that was after they were forced to move. And then the descendants of another tribe were like, hey, we're still here. We've been practicing our traditions here. We were forced out and we want to come back. So there are a lot of land disputes between tribes, but there's also just like a lot of uncertainty because the descendants may have lost those traditions, may have lost those stories. So they're not sure where exactly they were. If anyone could stop the share screen for me, it's like it's kind of loading in a really weird way where I can't touch anything right at the moment, but I can keep talking. So check out this resource. Also on our website, if you go to sogoreate-landtrust.org, we have a lot of things under our engage page that have to do about land acknowledgements, as well as how do you interact with Native people, how you can just be a better guest and a better ally to other communities. We have examples of land return and what that means for the different tribes. And what else do we have? There's a specific document called How to Come Correct, because we get so many wild requests from people that we had to respond to them in some way that didn't take away our time and energy and it didn't harm us. We've had some people like, hey, I want to start a clothing line and I want it to be with Native designs, but I'm a white man. And we're like, hey, this doesn't sound cool. We've seen it happen with big names and it didn't work out. And also, it's just not appropriate. How about your own lineage? And the guy said, well, I'm like Eastern European, and basically calling his culture boring and saying to us that he was disconnected from it. And we were like, that's not an excuse. Go out there and learn. But we had to tell him no 2 times. And it takes a lot of time and energy to respond to these requests. And for some people, it also just resurfaces trauma and it perpetuates harm. So we wanted to do something that could respond to people like that, where we're saying, think about the questions you're asking people and think about the positions you're putting them in when you take without returning anything. when you ask questions without first saying, hi, how are you? Introducing yourself and developing a relationship. Everything's still frozen, so I'm sorry.
Well, thanks, Nazshonnii. I couldn't figure out how to deal with this shared screen. So,
Okay.
so I guess we're stuck.
If you do new share screen, if you just click on it, it will stop mine.
I
Tried to do that. Excuse me. I tried to do that as well, and it's not working.
Oh no. Okay, well, I guess
yeah.
I'm frozen.
Yeah.
I'm glad you can hear me though.
Yeah,
I-
well,
Mhm.
it's great. It's a good image to leave us on, is this map. And so, Nazshonnii, I want to thank you so much for being with us. And as you've seen us, that we're trying to further this conversation in our department and university and our college. And so I think this could not come at a better time. And so we wanna thank you. And if you have any final like words for us, um, I think we lost you, but
We lost.
uh, we're yeah. And I want to thank everyone else, you all, for joining us, our closed captioners and interpreters, for making this happen too.